A lot of women might at first think, I don't know if I want to take a psychedelic, but when they hear about day one treatment effects, they read about the remission rates that we saw in our positive phase 2 study of 70%.
Welcome to Power to the Patients. I'm your host, Brandon Lee, and today I'm joined by Greg Mayes, President and CEO of Reunion Neuroscience. At Reunion, he's guiding the development of RE104, a next-generation psychedelic therapy being studied for postpartum depression and other mental health conditions. Greg, welcome to the show. So excited to be having this conversation.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity, Brandon. It's great to be here and welcome the opportunity to share a little bit about Reunion Neuroscience and what is now known as luvesilocin. RE104 has been given an official generic name since we last got up. And I'm proud to share a little bit about where luvesilocin is currently and where it's heading.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, why don't we start there? Give me the update, the journey from RE104 to luvesilocin.
Yeah, it's like love. It's like the word love, but it's luve. So it's luvesilocin. But in any event, we love luvesilocin. Luvesilocin is, as you mentioned, looking to go into postpartum depression. We had a positive phase 2 study called the Reconnect study in 84 women with moderate to severe postpartum depression. The outcome was statistically significant and very clinically meaningful. That data came out in Q3 of 2025. And since then, we've had the opportunity to meet with the agency, and we now have a phase 3 ready asset after a very constructive and positive meeting with the FDA. And more importantly, the FDA, following our end of phase 2 meeting, granted luvesilocin breakthrough designation status based upon the strength of the Reconnect study.
Well, congratulations on that. I'd love to dive a little bit deeper there. Tell me about the kind of decision to focus on postpartum depression as a starting point.
Yeah, postpartum depression is a major indication. It's an opportunity to be a blockbuster indication. In fact, we believe that by 2035, it could be a $3 billion a year revenue generating asset. But most importantly, women with moderate to severe postpartum depression present themselves not only with depressive mood features, but also anxiety. So the idea to go into postpartum depression really has informed us about how to whether luvesilocin can be effective and safe for women who not only have depression but also have anxiety, and or men too. So we're taking this into diseased men and women, and evaluating luvesilocin in those situations. So that was a great reason to, just as a starting point, go into postpartum depression. But as you know, there are no other psychedelic medicine developers out there looking at moving forward in postpartum depression. There remains a huge unmet medical need. 1 in 8 women suffer from postpartum depression during the pregnancy or following childbirth. And it remains the most common complication associated with pregnancy and childbirth. So, I mean, major unmet medical need. There's only one approved product out there. And we think this can be a massive breakthrough in terms of a new way to treat women with postpartum depression.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that kind of stuck out to me in our kind of prior conversation about this is the competitive landscape. And the fact that none of the other psychedelic folks that we've had on the podcast here have decided to start with postpartum. I'm curious, why do you think that is?
I think that, other psychedelic medicine drug developers have really decided to go into what I would call the big three, which is treatment-resistant depression, major depressive disorder, or generalized anxiety disorder, because they're large indications where there hasn't been really newly approved products in at least a decade or more. And so they view those as larger opportunities. But what we've been able to do is, in an acute situation, more rapidly identify whether we have a safe and effective agent for development, not only in postpartum depression, but in other indications like adjustment disorder. And now we're going into a larger indication, generalized anxiety disorder. But from our perspective, it was easier to set up and more rapidly able to conclude a study in postpartum depression where there was a great unmet medical need and there was a lot of interest from the women's health community in terms of this study.
Yeah. So if I'm familiar with the programs on adjustment disorder as well as generalized anxiety disorder. I'm curious, is there something specific about luvesilocin that you think provides a differentiated experience in postpartum disorder, or are you expecting some of the other psychedelic developers to maybe also consider this as an indication to pursue?
I mean, I think obviously they could. I mean, luvesilocin has a very similar chemical structure to psilocybin. In fact, luvesilocin is a psilocybin analog. It's a prodrug of 4-hydroxy-DIPT, so very similar. So one would think that psilocybin certainly could have an opportunity in postpartum depression, but no one is stepping forward to take that opportunity. So right now in the psychedelic medicine development space, we own it. We're the only game in town. There are other, as you know, Brandon, other modalities and other sort of quote unquote flavors of psychedelics. But they may not be, they for whatever reason, they are not choosing to go into postpartum depression. But I think, at the end of the day, there will be many different options for patients in the psychedelic area sector, and we'll have to see who chooses what. But we certainly believe that luvesilocin has a great opportunity here in postpartum depression as well as in other indications.
Yeah. Take me into the clinic here a little bit. I'm curious, as you designed your phase 2 or completed your phase 2 and are thinking about the upcoming phase 3 here, what are the unique operational challenges in working with postpartum as opposed to generalized anxiety or major depressive disorder?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a commonality across the psychedelic medicine development sector with respect to how these studies are set up. So I don't think they're all, that different in terms of, people wear eye shades. They tend to lay down or get comfortable in a bed, and they listen to music. And there's a monitor in the room. There's certain common elements. I think in postpartum depression, you are dealing with a patient population that is been naive to treatment. A lot of women might at first think, I don't know if I want to take a psychedelic, but when they hear about day one treatment effects, they read about the remission rates that we saw in our positive phase 2 study of 70%. They recognize that they do not have to stop or cease breastfeeding when they take the product. These are advantages that I think will draw women and more women to luvesilocin and the opportunity we present in the future should we continue to demonstrate and establish a positive, safe, and efficacious profile in the clinic. So we're phase 3 ready now. We're moving forward, but the operational challenges that we saw in the phase 2 study really surrounded the fact that we had to use a low dose active control, and we used a low dose active control for blinding and unblinding purposes, or really so we could blind the investigational asset luvesilocin from the women, so they would not know whether they received an active or a low dose active control. So that was a challenge. We won't have that challenge in phase 3 because in phase 3 we'll be evaluating luvesilocin 30 milligrams versus placebo. So actually there's an opportunity for the treatment effect to be much greater in the phase 3 study than what we saw in phase 2.
Gotcha. So you've decided to remove the active control arm.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, it's not really that we've decided. It's that the FDA in its 2023 clinical trial guidance on the development of psychedelic therapeutics really said, look, you need to do a study comparing your active, which in our case would be 30 milligrams of luvesilocin versus a low dose active control. And it's another study versus placebo so that they have a better understanding of the safety profile of the investigational asset. So we're following to a T the clinical trial guidance set forth by the FDA, and we think it's the right way to go. So, I think it's, to date, it has worked. I mean, we did a very solid, robust, clinically acceptable sort of operational structure for the phase 2 study. We'll do the same thing in phase 3, and if we see the same outcome, we're going to be knocking on the door of an NDA.
Very exciting stuff. Now, I understand that luvesilocin has been designed to produce a shorter psychedelic experience compared to, let's call it like maybe traditional psilocybin. Tell me a little bit about what went into that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, 4-hydroxy-DIPT is the original molecule, so to say. It was identified by Dr. Alexander Shulgin, but it suffered from bioavailability and stability issues. So, by creating a prodrug out of 4-hydroxy-DIPT, we were able to have a product that could be administered via sub-Q administration very quickly, very rapidly, and avoid food GI effects. But what had been always identified with 4-hydroxy-DIPT since its inception was the fact that it had the quality of a psychedelic trip like psilocybin, but it was deemed to be much shorter. So really, we took 4-hydroxy-DIPT, made it into a prodrug that overcame bioavailability and stability issues, and preserved the short-acting psychoactive experience.
Yeah. I'd love to maybe broaden the aperture a little bit here and talk about the next set of indications you're looking at. So we've started with postpartum. You're also looking at adjustment disorder, and then one of the big three, GAD. How did you think about sequencing these things? It looks like, from my naive perspective here, you took maybe let's call it like two of the more niche ones, and then you're going after a big three. So how did you think about that portfolio construction?
Sure. So I'd like to say that actually, I'm going to gently push back on you, Brandon. I don't view postpartum depression or adjustment disorder as quote unquote niche. As I mentioned earlier, I think postpartum depression could be a major blockbuster. We estimate $3 billion by 2035 in terms of our modeling of the opportunity, should we continue to move forward. Adjustment disorders, on the same token, wow, most people I speak to don't even know what an adjustment disorder is at first glance, okay? They say, an adjustment disorder, what is that? Well, it's actually a DSM-5 recognized indication by the FDA. And in fact, it was the FDA that pushed us forward to go into adjustment disorder. They suggested that that was the indication that we were seeking. What were we seeking? We were seeking to take data that had been generated by academic centers in the context of investigator-initiated studies using psilocybin to treat patients that had been diagnosed with end-of-life major medical illness, or in most cases, cancer. And the psilocybin treatments were remarkable. The results were great. These patients really overcame their mental health disorders associated with the diagnosis of a major medical illness like cancer. So as you sit back as a drug developer like Reunion Neuroscience and you say, what is going on with this, these studies that really were being developed in the context of psilocybin. The results were amazing, but they weren't moving forward. They weren't being brought forward by a sponsor in the context of a well and adequate controlled study. So we decided, based upon the fact that 4-hydroxy-DIPT has a very similar chemical structure to psilocybin, And where psilocybin works, we believe that luvesilocin could work. So this was easy pickings. This was low-hanging fruit for Reunion Neuroscience to say, let's move into what we were calling at the time psychiatric distress in cancer patients, or we were calling it palliative care with a psychedelic in cancer patients. We took it to the FDA and they said, no, it's an adjustment disorder. And I'm scratching my head going, what the heck's an adjustment disorder at the time? I mean, I quickly identified, and this is going back a couple of years, but the FDA said just an adjustment disorder is a disproportionate reaction to a major life stressor, like a major medical illness that completely limits one's independent ability to function. So this made perfect sense. And I'm a believer that, hey, when the FDA suggests something, you should really take it very seriously. In fact, when I was a drug developer in my early stages of my career, I had a mentor tell me that if the FDA tells you to put the dossier in a brown paper bag, you put it in a brown paper bag and you do as they're told. So in any event, really the FDA, we said, look, we want to take this bolus of great data from academic centers that looked at psilocybin in the context of a cancer diagnosis, end-of-life care, and move it forward. The FDA said, great, we love what you're doing. It's an adjustment disorder. Then the next question you ask yourself is, who else has an approval in adjustment disorder? Nobody. So the reason I say that this could be a major indication is that if we're successful in adjustment disorder with major medical illnesses like cancer, boy, you could also say that an adjustment disorder is a divorce, a bankruptcy, the loss of a job. Okay. So there's a lot of other life stressors that could fall into the basket of depression. And in fact, many psychiatrists that you talk to will say, look, the first thing they consider for somebody is adjustment disorder before they really get to major depressive disorder. And of course, later down the line, treatment-resistant disorder. So from my perspective, adjustment disorder could be viewed as a first-line treatment for a mental health disorder that really meets the criteria for an adjustment disorder. So really excited about adjustment disorder. That's the origin in terms of how we identified it. Psilocybin was similar to luvesilocin. There was great data with psilocybin in this patient demographic. And I believe that we can replicate if we can replicate the data associated with psilocybin from the early 2000s in this area, we could be on to another blockbuster and it won't be deemed a niche indication. So that's postpartum depression and adjustment disorder. I think you also asked about generalized anxiety disorder as well. And generalized anxiety disorder is only being pursued in the United States by one company that's doing quite well and seeing great data with LSD in the context of generalized anxiety disorder. But in terms of what we view ourselves as part of the psilocybin-like family with a short-acting psychoactive experience, we think that we could also work in generalized anxiety disorder. So again, this would be a different approach, a different type of psychedelic. But that coupled with the fact that we also were able to confirm in the Reconnect study in a post hoc subset analysis of patients with moderate to severe postpartum depression that also appeared with anxious features, that we actually were able to show a great separation between the low-dose active control and the active luvesilocin in patients that presented themselves with anxiety, and actually a relatively high, moderate to severe level of anxiety, a level of anxiety that you'd expect to see in a generalized anxiety disorder study. So really, it was between sort of the opportunity. There's room for more than one type of psychedelic to go into generalized anxiety disorder. That psychedelic has a much longer psychoactive experience time, I think up to be somewhere between 8 to 12 hours. And, our approach based upon the evaluations we've made of luvesilocin, our patients are going to have a psychoactive experience of 3 to 4 hours. So very different target product profile. But, we believe that, that there is a role for psychedelic administration in generalized anxiety disorder, and luvesilocin can provide a new and important option.
Yeah. Oh, I want to go back to adjustment disorder just very quickly here. I think the framing of it as almost a first line is really compelling. Uh, Tell me about the kind of decision to start with oncology patients, I guess, in this like initial set.
Yeah, I mean, well, it was relatively easy because there was 5 studies that were done at these academic centers, and they all virtually focused on a cancer diagnosis. So obviously, when you come along as a drug developer and sponsor and follower, you want to try to replicate what's been done before, particularly when it's been done successfully. But I will add that the FDA also suggested that we move into that we show safety and effectiveness in 4 other categories of major medical illness. They are ALS, Parkinson's disease, MS, and pulmonary fibrosis. So we have also added a small basket in addition to the cancer patients. So we're actually looking at, out of 100 patients, 80 will have cancer as their diagnosis, and 20 will have these, what we call other major medical illnesses that we'll be looking at. So that if we're successful in both cancer and other major medical illnesses, we will have the opportunity to, ultimately longer term, and should we go down the path of NDA submission and an approvable label, we would be able to say that luvesilocin works not only in cancer patients, but in patients with a major medical illness diagnosis, and sort of the amelioration and remission of their mental health disorder that's associated with the major medical illness.
Yeah. And for the audience who's listening here and potentially interested in that, can you help maybe paint a clinical profile of somebody that you might be targeting for that program? At what, like, how long after the kind of stressor are you looking for there to be symptoms? How long should these symptoms have lasted? Like, help us understand really the profile of person that you're interested in kind of bringing into this study.
It's rather simple. Really, it's patients that have been diagnosed with this major medical illness, and beyond sort of the physical ailment associated with the major medical illness, they are also struggling with a depressive mood disorder that has rapidly come on as a result of the acute diagnosis, and in some ways it's an additional burden for them to carry, and they're really suffering as a result of the major medical illness diagnosis, and they present to their oncologist, the notion that they have become depressed, that they are unable to function as a result, and it can actually ultimately interfere with the course of their treatment for in the example of most of our patients, their underlying cancer treatment. So getting the patient well in terms of their mental health is just as important, so they can take care of their physical ailments, whether it be cancer or some other type of major medical diagnosis. I mean, I actually got into neuropsychiatry and the field of psychedelic drug development, the psychedelic medicine drug development, because when I was working in epilepsy, and I started an epilepsy company, and this would apply to epilepsy too, an adjustment disorder, because it's a major medical illness. But what you would find in the epilepsy context, for example, was that 1/3 had uncontrolled seizures, but over 80%, so even controlled patients who had their seizure activity controlled, had a mental health disorder associated with their diagnosis. So I'm very sort of attuned to the fact that you may be diagnosed for A, but you might be also diagnosed with B, and B being depression or some other mood disorder. And so, we need to take care of the whole patient, not just a part of the patient.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I want to uh, I want to maybe get to your career maybe a little bit further down in the conversation and just kind of reflect on the story there. But before we get there, maybe one last topic under the kind of umbrella of Reunion, which is the other asset that you have, RE245. My understanding is it's a non-psychedelic neuroplastogen, another very exciting category of drug. Tell me a little bit more about that asset and how it plays into the kind of broader picture for you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's another investigational asset that we're readying for the clinic in 2027. Right now, it's in the late stage pre-IND enabling stage of preclinical development. You were exactly right. It's a neuroplastogen that's non-hallucinating and could therefore be eligible longer term for chronic administration in the at-home environment. It's something that drug developers are really going after. Some are, and but it hasn't been proven necessarily to be effective as of right now. So, but we're in that parade of other folks that are looking at developing neuroplastogens, as you say. So, more to come. More on the come, more in 2027 once we start dosing patients in that with our RE245.
Yeah. So as a biotech, I know that you're probably always coming up against limited resources as a constraint. How do you think about balancing between 3 programs in the clinic and a novel asset on its way as well?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, you're obviously you're constantly you raise money. We successfully raised with the leadership of MPM BioImpact and Novo Holdings a $133 million Series A in 2024. That the proceeds of which were designed to fund 3 phase 2 programs and our novel preclinical asset that I just spoke about, RE245. So, you basically, what you have to do is you have to financially forecast and budget out how long and how much time and how much money do you need to get to the endpoint. Now, in our case, we're lucky. We have we've successfully managed and executed on our budget. So we are exactly where we wanted to be. We're going to have all 3 phase 2s done within the time frame of our cash runway, which lasts into the second half of 2027. So, that's how we have done it at Reunion, in terms of just being able to take the $133 million and say, okay, how do we allocate these among really what is 4 programs and should be 3 data cards in phase 2 by the time by the time we need more money.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Greg, this isn't your first rodeo. You've had a handful of successes up until this point. For the audience, maybe just give us maybe just like an overview of your career and how you ended up getting down this path of the psychedelic development space.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I've had a 25-year career in life sciences broadly. I started as an attorney in a large international law firm doing life science transactional work. And that led me to in-house opportunities at the likes of AstraZeneca, Eli Lilly, ImClone Systems. In fact, I was the lead oncology lawyer for AstraZeneca's oncology program. I subsequently went to ImClone Systems, where I became general counsel and contributed significantly to the $6.5 billion sale of ImClone to Eli Lilly in 2008. That opportunity really propelled me into going on the business side. I ended up working in a role managing the integration of the merger between ImClone and Lilly. And from there, I was offered an opportunity to go into the business and operational side, something I really wanted to do. I had really studied the business from the legal perspective, but really had an opportunity to become a quote unquote operator of the business, and took on a couple of chief operating officer roles at mid-sized publicly traded biotechs. And then in 2017, I decided to start my own business and raise money and really start a biotech. My son at the time in 2014 had been diagnosed with epilepsy. And I was fortunate enough to have him under the great care of some epileptologists at New York University. While they were taking care of my son, they were also introducing me to really great projects, great ideas in the epilepsy space. And one of them was an inhaled alprazolam that would have the ability to rapidly stop a seizure once somebody would stop it and stop it in its tracks. If somebody had an aura, somebody was about to the beginning stages of an epileptic seizure, they could take the product and stop it, or at least that was the hypothesis. So we took the investigational asset through a large phase 2B study, and we were very successful in its outcome. And within a few months, sold the company following data to UCB in 2020. Right now, I'm in my third VC-backed CEO role. I enjoy it. They're small companies. I enjoy the fundraising. I enjoy working with small teams. I enjoy the opportunity to roll up my sleeves. I enjoy the opportunity to set aggressive strategic visions and execute on them. So, and as I mentioned earlier, I mean, the opportunity to go work in neuropsychiatry after I'd had the epilepsy company experience really spoke to me, because I really felt that mental health, as we know it, is a major societal problem. With millions around the globe suffering from it. So the opportunity to work on a paradigm changing therapy, and also that one that I saw could have benefit for patients that were, sick with other disorders like epilepsy, like cancer, like ALS, like Parkinson's disease, and so on. So really, really thought this would be a great opportunity to sort of push out a new frontier. And that's exactly what you're seeing today. You're now seeing, when I first came into the psychedelic medicine development space, you really saw the idea. But fast forward, now that I've been at Reunion 3.5 years, you're actually seeing the idea of psychedelic drug development is now really taking shape. The traction is great. People are now talking about when will these therapies be approved, not whether they even work. And right now, I mean, you're seeing a very high, extremely high percentage. I think it's around 82% of the studies with psychedelics are positive. The safety profiles are very tolerable and manageable. The results are outstanding. And the commercial infrastructure is starting to build to really bring these assets forward. So, I think there will be a number of winners. And I think that ultimately the winners are patients who will have the opportunity to choose which psychedelic is right for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Greg, this is your third role as a venture-backed CEO of a biotech. What do you know now that you wish you knew in your first go at it?
I think what do I know? What do I wish I had? What do I wish I had known? I do feel that I will say this after or during, because I'm in my third role as a venture-backed CEO, that the experiences start to repeat. So the more, I mean, like you start like, not that I've seen it all, because I'm sure there's something I haven't seen, but I have experienced a lot. And I mean, in terms of, you have to start with funding. I mean, a lot of great ideas really die on whiteboards all across this country and around the world. And it's a shame, but you got to go out and get the money so you can hire the right people and you can do the right studies to bring new, novel, and important assets forward. I don't think I appreciated how important fundraising and cash resources were. I mean, I understood it a bit and I knew it was important, but really it's the lifeblood of biotechnology. I also wish I had known that, it's a special type of individual that can go work. I mean, my companies have been anywhere from as few as 7 employees. Reunion's the largest one with 22. And my other one probably had 13 or 14 employees. So being able to navigate, manage, inspire smaller workforces on the dream and what you can push forward is a skill. And I think I've been able to successfully do that and manage and get the most out of, I think, a smaller workforce that enjoys really bringing forward new paradigm shifting opportunities for patients.
This is a topic that we haven't broached on the podcast before, but I'm dying to know. Actually, is the idea of fundraising as a biotech. I imagine that I've only ever done it as a technology entrepreneur, never as a biotech entrepreneur. I'm curious, what does it take to tell a compelling story about the opportunity, especially in a space as crowded as the psychedelic space is?
I mean, first of all, you have to figure out your audience. You have to get to an audience, right? But you generate your audience for fundraising based upon the story. And the story, as you know, Brandon, tends to be based upon some type of, pitch deck, or every sort of product or every sort of, executive has a story. I've just shared with you, my story about why I wanted to get into psychedelic medicine drug development. I saw an opportunity which so far to date has panned out. I mean, panned out at my company and panned out at other psychedelic medicine drug developers, at least to date, and in the generation of data and their indications. But you need to be able to you need to be able to have thick skin when you tell the story. There's going to be there's going to be rejections. There's going to be investors. There's going to be investors that you're not, hitting up at the right time. They're not going to tell you that they don't have enough money to invest in your company. They may not tell you that it's the right time. They may tell you that it's off strategy when it may be on strategy, but they simply are just too busy. So, you have to have thick skin and a lot of resilience to be able to, to move these programs forward. I remember at the epilepsy company, Engaged Therapeutics. I mean, I quickly got out to about 150 investors, did about 150 meetings, and got about 50 under CDA. I thought, wow, I'm doing great. I got 50 under CDA, and that 50 quickly became 10. But luckily, the 10 that I got it down to, were really motivated, really interested, and I only needed to grab 3 or 4 of them. But it's a real numbers game. I mean, you have to start with a significant number of investors that you're willing to knock on the door of, send emails to, and really sort of get them interested and intrigued by the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. In tech land, there's a say, there's 2 camps. There's a camp of you're always fundraising, always taking meetings, getting to know, building relationships, and there's also a camp of no, fundraising is a discrete event where you do 150 meetings in a few weeks, and then you whittle things down. How does it work on biotech side? Do you have a perspective on which side of the line you prefer to sit on?
I mean, I think you're to some extent you're always in fundraising mode, and you're always sort of selling the company. But I will say this. And in fact, my experience at Reunion Neuroscience has been just that over the past year. Once I successfully raised the $133 million Series A, that was led by a couple very prominent investors, I I kind of turned off the fundraising spigot. I said, I'm not going to be able to fundraise another dollar if I don't execute well, if I don't get this study done on time, and if I don't have positive results from this study. So I needed to execute, execute, execute. And so I really did shift my focus, not necessarily everything, but my focus really became, how do I maximize the generous amount of resources I now have to ensure that when I have to do a Series B, I can go out and do a Series B with great data and a great opportunity to move this forward, and not only through phase 2, but into phase 2, into phase 3, and successfully through phase 3, and hopefully what will result in a new drug application with the FDA.
Greg, this has been such an interesting show. We've covered so many diverse topics here. Is there anything we haven't spoken about today that you were hoping to cover?
I don't think so. I mean, Brandon, you're quite the journalist here on the side. No, I mean, I think you've given me an opportunity to speak about the early days of Reunion Neuroscience and how we've progressed really over the last 3.5 years since I've been with the company. You've given me an opportunity to talk about not only our lead indication in postpartum depression, but also our second and third indications for luvesilocin in adjustment disorder, as well as generalized anxiety disorder. We're working hard just like everybody else. We think we're a fast follower. We can really leverage the commercial infrastructure and some of the great results that a few of the companies that may be ahead of us are taking advantage of. So it's been a pleasure to catch up with you again. I really can't think of anything you missed other than who's going to win the NCAA basketball tournament this weekend. But anyway, I'll hold on that. But in any event, thank you. I just want to thank you for the opportunity.
Greg, I've so enjoyed this conversation. We here at Power are actively cheering for you over there at Reunion Neuroscience. So hoping to see these upcoming programs with some incredible data. So congratulations on a successful ride thus far, and looking forward to seeing more from you.
Absolutely. Again, thanks for the opportunity, Brandon. I look forward to staying in touch with you and keeping you updated on our progress as we move forward.
Of course. Take care.
Thank you.